Hello and welcome to Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. My name is James Moffitt, and I will be your host. Today, our guest speaker is named Mark. Mark, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me on, James.
Yeah. So, where are you from?
I'm from Arkansas.
Oh, okay. So, as you know, this is a Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. We talk about Second Amendment issues. We talk about situational awareness. We talk about guns, ammunition, accessories, all sorts of stuff. It's supported the U.S. Constitution, Bill of Rights. I'm in South Carolina, so I've been very much involved in the 2A movement here. Go ahead and tell the listening audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name's Mark. I host a podcast as well called the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast. So the mission of that podcast is similar to yours. You know, we're trying to educate the general public out there just on tactics, self-defense, but also we're on a mission to revalorize the military virtues of our ancestors. You know, there was a time when all of our ancestors, even if you were a farmer or a fisherman, knew how to protect themselves, their family, their village and community. And a lot of that's been lost. That's been outsourced in modernity to a large extent. And so more than just teaching the physical skills, which are part of it, but we also think that there's a metaphysical, almost a spiritual component, if I can use that word, although that's kind of a charged word in this day and age, but that is that there's kind of a through line that runs through all ancient warrior cultures that they shared. And so we dive into those things as well. So if you're in the military, law enforcement, or just a security minded citizen, there's a host of topics. So we don't concentrate totally on that aspect because it's not for everybody.
Sure.
So there's enough topics around there that, you know, would be of interest to people. As far as myself, I'm going on 13 years in the Army, both on active duty and in the National Guard component. So that time was split in the infantry and the intelligence field. My last duty position was as an infantry instructor. So I've gone to a number of combat schools, army schools, and things like that. I also, during my break in service, I finished college, ended up going to law school, and I was a deputy district attorney for 6 years. And
Wow.
then, I did that for 6 years. So I had jury trials and, you know, just trying to hammer bad guys and clean up streets and keep our streets safe, things like that. And then around 2013, I guess I'd say I had a little bit of running and gunning left still in my system. So I started Veritas Defense, which is a security training and consulting company. So we've provided training to military units with the Department of Defense. We've done contracts or trainings with the Department of Justice. I've consulted with some Fortune 500 companies, and I've probably taught at 60 police departments, are getting pretty doggone close, 60 police departments across the country. And then I've run, I don't know, hundreds, or probably past the thousands in the, as far as civilians on just tactical training, as far as with firearms.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's been a good ride. It's been a good ride.
I don't think we're going to have a lack of things to talk about.
Yeah.
So, like I said, my listening audience is basically patriots. You know, Second Amendment people here in South Carolina that are supportive of the Second Amendment. They believe in liberty. They believe in less government overreach, more control to the civilians and to patriots, and they. You know, like I said, very supportive of being liberty-minded and believing that we are our own first responders, right?
Sure.
When seconds count, you are your own first responder, and you need to be able to react efficiently to whatever the threat is. I'm a VP of South Carolina Carry, which is a 501c4 nonprofit here in South Carolina, and we're very involved in the gun rights movement here in South Carolina, and we've been instrumental in helping to get us, you know, constitutional carry and reciprocity with Georgia, so that Georgians and South Carolinians can travel across the border, and we recognize each other's concealed weapon permits and things like that. So yeah, I'm gonna read something from your profile. We can just kind of jump off from there. It says Mark's extensive experience in security operations and tactical training provides a unique lens for discussing personal defense strategies and the development of a warrior mindset aligning with your focus on gun rights and self-defense. So we probably don't have operators, or however you want to define, you know, people like yourself that are very keen on advanced tactical procedures and stuff. You're really kind of talking to your everyday citizen that they may be a CPA, they may be an attorney, they may be a
Mm-hmm.
teacher, just
Mm-hmm.
a regular citizen who goes about their business and they get their CWP, they get their CWP training. They carry a concealed weapon for self-defense, and they understand about situational awareness. Maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
They may not know anything about the OODA loop or any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically your audience.
Right.
So
Okay. Yeah. Well, at our training events, I've run classes for everybody from grandmas that's never touched a gun before to airborne troops coming back from Afghanistan. So, and everybody in between. So if anybody on this podcast is anywhere in between, then yeah, I could talk to them.
cool.
Yeah.
All right. So can you talk about situational awareness a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Do you have it? I mean, it's a pretty deep topic.
Right.
You go on the internet and you can find plenty of 750 word articles and stuff that kind of just
Yeah, I'm just
gloss
talking about
over
a.
it.
I'm
But
talking about a 1 mile down overview of why is it important. Okay, let's just say you're whoever you are listening to this podcast episode, your typical 2A supporter may not have military experience, may not have
hmm
law enforcement experience, may not have any private security experience. They're just a citizen that has decided to carry a firearm for self-defense. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of paying attention to what's going on in your surroundings, right?
yeah, well, so for those who have decided to take up the firearm as their personal defense weapon and they're going to carry every day or most days, you want to think of that as really your last resort.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It
Yes.
only takes a second to pull the trigger, but the consequences, the aftermath of that will last you probably the rest of your lifetime, in a number of ways. And so that really needs to be your item of last resort if possible. And one of the ways you can't guarantee it, but one thing you can do to kind of stack the deck in your favor is just by being aware. The best way to avoid an attack is if you can see it coming, but you can't see it coming if you don't know what you're looking for. And so
Right.
that's where situational awareness comes in. Over the years, just training with people, whether they're peers or whether they're people that are instructing me, when I would go off to trainings or people that come through our classes, at some point they you're training in the hard skills, right, with the weapons, and then the questions of, well, what if the what ifs start popping up. The people that will ask questions of, well, what if this happens, or what if that happens, or what if Santa Claus jumps out of the sleigh, and whatever, and
Sure.
you can what if things to death. But the
Sure.
big thing that will help you and help the listeners, if you look at situational awareness first as just something that buys you, is something that you can see at a distance. Because if you can see and recognize, you may not know exactly what it is. It might just be something that raises your suspicion or gains your attention, of something that requires further inquiry of you to know whether or not it's a threat or not. But if you can see things at a distance, then that buys you time, and with that time, that gives you an opportunity to formulate a response, instead of being caught
Sure.
flat-footed. And so that is probably the greatest asset that comes with just being situationally aware, in your daily life, no matter what you do for a living,
Right. You know as well as I do that if you go out into the public, you go to the mall, go out in the
hmm
parking lots, and if you people watch, and I like to do that a lot. I like to go to the
hmm
mall and get something to eat and sit outside in one of the benches and just watch people.
hmm
90% of the people are walking around with their head stuck in a smart device. Their
hmm
iPhones, iPads, a
hmm
tablet, whatever. People aren't really paying attention to what's going on around them, right? And so I always tell people that, like, let's say your wife goes out and she's shopping at the mall and she's fixing to go out to her car. Depending on if it's dusk or getting dark, ask the local security, ask the mall security to escort you to your car,
hmm
and
yeah.
that way you've got somebody else that's got your back and is helping
hmm
you watch what's going on.
Sure.
Don't just have a handful of packages and have
Right.
your earbuds in, looking at
hmm
your phone, not looking
hmm
at where your car is. Do you
right.
see strangers walking around? Like I tell people when you're driving home from the grocery store and you pull up in your driveway, Who's standing by your front door?
Yeah.
Who's in the driveway? How closely are your shrubs, trimmed? Or could a
Mm-hmm.
human being behind you be, are they big enough that an average sized person could be standing behind the shrub and surprise you when you're trying to come up to your door and unlock it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of mechanics involved in all of that, but
Mm-hmm.
the general synopsis is that pull your mind out of your smart device and pay attention to
Mm-hmm.
what's going on around you. Know where the exits are. One of the things I tell people is that if you're people watching and somebody's watching you, that's something that sets off an alert in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
If they're
Mm-hmm.
watching what I'm doing or they're watching
Mm-hmm.
where I'm going or coming from,
Mm-hmm.
then to me that it could be a potential predator, right? And
Yeah.
so what are predators looking for? They're looking for a soft target. They're looking for
Mm-hmm.
somebody that's an easy mark. They want to come steal your wallet, your money,
Mm-hmm.
or worse, right? Depending on
Mm-hmm.
what the scenario is. And it's like you said, you could what if this to death.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so
Yeah, normally we start people, like I said earlier, situational awareness, you can really doesn't matter where you start. It's a broad topic and you can get into Cooper's color codes and OODA loop. You mentioned that
right,
earlier and things like
right,
that. There's a number of ways to address it, but one of the simplest ways that everybody can do starting right this moment, right this second, that's
sure,
pretty easy to implement, just takes a little practice to do it consistently, is we teach people five. The magic number is 5 and 25. We tell people to watch their 5s and 25s, and what that means is it's really a scan of your area in a 360-degree orientation that first begins with 5 meters, 5 yards first. So if you
right,
pull into the parking lot somewhere, before you get out of your car, right, you put it in drive. Before you get out of your car, you should do a 360 scan within 5 meters of where you're parked. So that's
right,
also utilizing your rear view mirrors, your side mirrors, and try to get a scan first of the immediate area. That's your
right,
immediate sector, your primary sector, right? Once that looks good, you can shift that out to about 25 meters or 25 yards, right? Again, looking past there. And then, that's where you're looking for any kind of irregularities, something that catches your attention. If you see a guy kind of just maybe looking out of place, or he's kind of eyeballing you, mean mugging you, whatever it is, just anything that just gets your attention, then you can hone in on that and decide what that means for you. And so
right,
then once you get out of your car, you just keep those scans going, right? It's immediate.
sure,
5 meters, you're going to pass by let's say you're in a parking lot going into the shopping mall or something. You're going to go by several different types of blind spots, be they cars, other types of instructions you find in an urban area, and corners. If you're if you're walking down the street in a densely urban area, right, there'll be corners and things like that as you
sure,
make a block or whatever. And so you're always kind of scanning for those. So you're always keeping your 5 meter areas clear, so to say, and then pushing it out to 25. And then you get in the store, you do your business. Then before you step out of the store, you hit that scan again, 5 and 25. And you just keep pushing that out. And then by the time you get to your car, you should have your car keys in your hand, ready to
right,
go. And then
right,
you get in, and what a lot of people do as soon as they get in their car, they start dilly-dallying on their phone. They're checking their
right,
emails. They're doing
right,
whatever. And that's really not the time to do that. Not in this day and age, I don't think.
right,
Even if you're in a safe area. I mean, I live in a relatively safe area, but I can tell you from 6 years of law enforcement that even in safe areas, people become victims of crime. And it's the people
sure,
oftentimes who are unaware that becomes victim of crime. So, that's a minor inconvenience to not be able to check your email on your phone for that momentary, do that when you get back home or you get someplace where you're safe and secure. But, starting that, if people did that, there's just a whole wide range, because that gets back to what that does is it creates distance, and distance buys you time. And when you do see someone, or for instance, if you see some guy that looks like he ain't take a shower in a couple weeks and is kind of shifty, or there's just something about his body language that's just kind of sending alert signals off in your head. Well, if you catch that guy at 25 meters or 20 meters away, and all of a sudden you make eye contact and he starts walking towards you, well, he may just be asking you for directions. He may be asking you for a
Money.
light. He might be, or
Yeah.
more often
For
the case,
food.
money. And he may
Yeah.
not be a threat to you. But the point is as he approaches you, you want to receive him on your own terms, not on
Right.
his. And
Right.
that's what those scans do for you. I've had that happen to me before numerous times, and it keeps you from being caught flat-footed, right?
Right.
Because if someone is coming up to mug you or try to take something from you, oftentimes they don't just run up and just hit you straight on. They'll try to lower your guard by getting close into your personal space, asking you questions, asking you for something that's pretty benign to try to draw your attention off of them or to get your guard down, and then they strike. So if you can already be in a defensive posture without being, you don't have to be rude about it, but just being in a way that you're positioned in a way that they can't take advantage of you, right? You're further ahead, right? You've kind of stacked the deck in your favor. And so, observing those 5s and 25s, man, that can really do you a lot of good if you do that consistently.
Yeah, that's very excellent information, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. And I also agree with you that having a defensive firearm is only it's just a tool in your toolkit, right?
Right.
And I always tell people the most powerful tool that you have in your possession for personal defense is your brain. God gave you a brain, He gave you common sense. Obviously, the more training that you can get, if you have a CWP, you want to go to an advanced CWP course or whatever, or if you want to do IDPA or USPSCA, there are a lot of shooting sports out there that help you to learn how to shoot on the move. Self-defense situation. It's not going to be anything like standing at a shooting range in a static position, shooting at a man-sized piece of paper. Right? It's self-defense situations, as you know, are very fluid, very dynamic, and very life-threatening, and it gets your adrenaline pumping, and so it's the more training that you can get, the better off you're going to be when the poop hits the fan, right?
Right. Yeah. Agree.
So, and talk about non-lethal weapons that people might be able to carry.
So, I mean, probably go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of that's going to be dependent upon the jurisdiction that you're living in as to what there's South Carolina gun laws. There's, you said you're in Arkansas. I'm sure they have gun laws, and your state legislature defines what a weapon is, right? And so, I guess you have to be, if you're listening to this podcast, you need to become aware of what your laws are in your state to understand what a non-lethal weapon would be legal for you to carry.
Right. One of my favorites, and this is me as a guy talking,
right?
But what my favorites, just for me personally, is a smaller, like handheld what's called a tactical flashlight. Right. I like those a lot. Yeah. They're kind of like that, but they have a light on them. And so it's a multi-purpose kind of tool, right? There's obviously it's got the light function, so you can use it just for searching. If you drop something or you're trying to look at something in a dark place, it comes in super handy. But it's also the way you can hold it, right? If you have it in a reverse kind of grip, now it can become an impact weapon. And with just a little bit of training, and I do recommend people get some training on it, it can be pretty effective, right? Is it as good as maybe other things? Is it as good as a baseball bat? Yeah, maybe not, but it can do, if you strike some sensitive targets like bridge of the eyes or bridge of the nose, into the orbital socket, into the temple, into the neck, can be pretty effective, right? And it doesn't take years and years to hone, right? You can learn in a short amount of time how to maximize your striking power with that thing. The other thing is, the light itself can be a momentary distraction if you flash it into their eyes. And especially if you have it in a reverse grip, you can bring it up, do a quick flash into the eyes. It's not going to buy you a lot of time. It may buy you just a millisecond, but sometimes that's all you need, right? To strike and to get away, if you're justified in doing so. And the other thing is, they're very easy to carry, right? They're very convenient, and the more convenient something is, then the more likely you're going to carry it on the regular, right? So that, and the other thing is they're very unassuming, right? If you we've done some training with church security teams even, and I tell them, well, some teams are armed, but not every team is armed, and not
Sure.
everybody on a church team that has an armed presence or armed component to it, not all of those team members are necessarily qualified with their church to do it. But the fact is that everybody can carry a flashlight, and they have
Right.
something, right? And the thing is that those little tactical flashlights are very unassuming, particularly, and I bring up the church security thing because if the person recognizes you as being on the church security team, you having a flashlight in your hand is pretty unassuming, right? There's
Sure.
not a
It's normal.
lot of it's relatively normal. People are used to seeing security people with a flashlight of some kind. So, and I would kind of extrapolate that into the civilian world too. I mean, people are just not as taken aback if you have a small flashlight in your hand versus if you have a knife in your hand or a gun or something like that. Yeah, or a baseball bat. So,
hey, what are you going to do with that baseball bat?
Yeah, exactly. I really like those. I know OC sprays are popular, pepper spray or some kind of OC spray. I don't have a lot of experience with those. I don't teach that stuff and I don't carry them, but I understand the value for people that are good with it. I think that's particularly, I know plenty of females that carry that. Sure. And they like it, and it makes them, feel safer. But it's the big key though with anything. It doesn't matter what you carry. None of this stuff is a magic talisman, right? We are far removed from that world, and so just because you have it doesn't mean that it's going to avail you of any special advantages if you don't know how to use it. Right. If you can't access it, if you haven't practiced accessing it under some sort of stressful stimulus, then it might even become more of a liability than an asset, sure, depending on the circumstances. So whatever there's a wide range of things you can carry. Just make sure that the laws that govern your carrying and use of it, and then make sure that you know what you're doing with it. And that's kind of the end all, right, that I would add to that.
Right. The only thing I don't like about OC spray, bear spray, or whatever it is, or civilian mace or whatever, the only thing I don't like about it is that sometimes to be effective with that stuff, you need to be fairly close to your assailant. And sometimes that stuff you can get it on you. If you're not careful, it can splash into your eyes, and then all of a sudden you're, I don't know. I kind of steer away from that stuff. But if somebody is comfortable with it, it's legal for them to carry, and they've practiced it in their own environment, so they know how far the little jet stream goes and how close you need to be to the person or not close to them. It's all about educating oneself on the tools that you're going to use and carry.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm looking at some of your questions. One of the questions says, how can civilians develop a warrior mindset for self-defense?
Yeah, so even just the word mindset itself, those are loaded terms depending on the context. And then if you stick warrior on that can mean a lot of different things to different people. Just like words, just even you had mentioned the word operator, I've watched over the last, 10, 15 years, that word kind of change in meaning. When I was coming up, if you said operator, that was kind of like the new, the more modern version of the word commando. That tended to be more like a special operations kind of guy. That word was kind of reserved to them, and then it got into law enforcement, and then now it's just stretched out to just all kinds of stuff. And same thing with tactical. Now tactical used to mean a specific kind of deal, and now we got tactical pants, tactical knives, and tactical breathing, and tactical shoes or whatever. So mindset's the same way. But like for me, I think your mindset is just, for me, it's probably broader than a lot of other folks are. I mean, I would almost encapsulate that into a worldview almost in certain instances. But then if you attach the warrior to it, kind of goes by that. Well, what are warriors? A warrior is someone who is trained and fights in my definition, on behalf of their community, right? So you don't have to be in the military to be a warrior. In fact, I've had other veterans on my podcast, and we've talked about, like, we know a lot of fighters in the military that aren't warriors, because they're not tied to a community, really. I mean, they're fighting for a paycheck, and they might be really good at it, but that's kind of where their loyalty ends. For some, not certainly. I'm not saying that for everybody. So that's my definition of a warrior. And so then you add that word mindset to it. And so it's just someone who's willing to face adversity, to face discomfort, to see struggle as not necessarily something to be avoided, but something that is part of the learning process.
Right.
Physical struggle, mental struggle, to learn something new, the ability and the capacity to accept being uncomfortable in situations so that you grow, so you struggle, you grow. We live in a society right now in modernity that is just obsessed with safety and comfort, right? I mean, we're just obsessed with it, right? We want everything on demand. We want to stream it on demand. We don't want to wait till the release date. We want it now. We want somebody to drive food to our house so we don't have to go out and get it. We want our thermostat set at a, and speaking about food, I mean, pretty soon we'll probably be hiring people to actually feed it to us. But you get where I'm going with, right?
Yeah,
and I'm certainly not just instant gratification, and it's through the roof now. I mean, we're a hyper individualistic, hyper consumer culture, right? And that's just where we are now. And if you're going to pursue the warrior path, if you're going to try to pursue what the ancient Greeks called arete, or like personal excellence, right? And all the things that you do, well, you're going to have to work, and you're going to have to struggle, and you're going to have to, in some sense of the word, suffer, to do that. And I think that the warriors of old, especially in the older warrior cultures, they accepted that and lived that. And so for me, that's kind of part of what the warrior mindset is. It goes well beyond just self-defense, but not everybody's into that, right? So if you're just thinking about just in the perspective of just a self-defense, well, then you're going to have to adopt a certain amount of this. Going to have to be a way of life. It's not, I know several people, and you probably do too, that are hot to trot to go get their concealed carry license, and they'll get their gun, and there it rests in the glove box or the console of their vehicle, and they really don't ever get it out, or it's by their nightstand and they don't really get it out. So, again, it goes back to that magic talisman thing. It's like, I got this piece of paper. It says I can carry it, but as far as just even being able to draw it safely and put rounds down on a target under some sort of stress, that isn't something that they're training on, or on a consistent basis, because it is a perishable skill. And so if you're looking just solely from a self-defense perspective, then that's not the right kind of mindset. You don't have to turn this into a second job. We're all busy. Things are expensive. We have to work, and we want to have some downtime, and we don't, where we can decompress and not worry about the cares of life. We have to, or we're going to burn ourselves out and just live a miserable existence. But at the same time, you're going to have to carve out, if you're serious about this, you're going to have to incorporate this in a way into such a way that it's not a burden, but that it's something that you enjoy because it's part of your lifestyle, right? And even if that's just meaning dry firing, and even if that's 10 minutes a day, okay, well, you don't have 10 minutes of a day, 10 minutes 3 times a week, something, whatever it is, and something you can add to from there. Maybe, taking your spare change, putting that in a coffee can over time until you save up enough money for some extra ammo and attend a class, to try to invest in your own self, right? Those types of things that, if you're going to take up this path, you're going to have to devote some amount of time and resources into it. Otherwise, all you're doing is giving your money to the gun shop. And I mean, I want to support the gun shops as much as anybody, but they're providing you an asset, but you are the one that has to make it into an asset. It doesn't just come out of the box being useful to you.
Well, it's like you said, it's a perishable skill. If you don't don't go to the range at all, in your guns in your nightstand, or it's in the safe, or it's in the glove box, it's like driving a car. We weren't born with the knowledge of how to drive a car, right?
Right.
We had
Right.
to go to school. We had to learn
Mm-hmm.
traffic laws. We
Mm-hmm.
had to pass a written exam.
Mm-hmm.
We had a driving instructor get in the car with us.
Right.
You had to learn you had to show them you knew how to park a car and you knew how to make a right turn using your turn. So it's just like that. You
Yeah.
know, you had to learn how to drive the car safely, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
you could kill somebody, right?
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
same thing. The same thing with a self-defense weapon, firearm. You have to learn how to handle it proficiently. You know,
Right.
you have to have a holster that's at least at bare minimum a level one retention holster, so that somebody can't just walk up to you and yank it out of your holster. I mean, how many memes have we seen on Facebook where these yahoos are in the Circle K and they're carrying a gun, flapping around in a Velcro holster
Yeah.
that anybody could just walk up and grab from them. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, that's probably for people that are just coming new to this, and not to just, make it sound burdensome, but it's just part of the purchase, right? Is that the holster is part of the kit. It's
sure,
part of
yeah,
the equipment, and you have to devote some time to finding the right kind of holster for you. Not every holster is going to work the same way for everybody else. I mean, that's why we have different companies, we have different
sure.
styles. I got a whole closet full of holsters that
I was
over the
gonna say
years.
you got a box of holsters that you've tried.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
got
So
one right
see,
behind me. Yep.
exactly. I mean, that's a common part of the journey is, a lot of times people will go on the cheap, they get the cheap one, they start using it. I don't like that so much. So they upgrade. That one's not so great either. I mean, I've got some very, very expensive holsters, or in my mind that they're expensive, that are in that box because they just don't work as good for me. So,
Right.
you don't have to buy every single one. I mean, that's where having some buddies that are
Sure.
also on this journey with you or help, because you could try theirs out.
Right.
You can see how it fits. You can say, hey, what's that you're having? And try to optimize your purchase power, right? But yeah, the holster really is important, and I would consider that part of the firearm, right? You
Sure.
have to have it, and you need to
Sure.
spend a decent amount of time doing your research and due diligence on finding the right one for you. Because again, it goes back to convenience. If it's inconvenient because it's uncomfortable and it becomes a nuisance or an inconvenience for you to carry it, then you're probably not going to carry it every day.
Right.
So,
It's not going to do you any good sitting in a box in
right.
your closet, right? And you absolutely should not be carrying a firearm outside of a holster, like a woman's purse.
Yeah.
You don't carry a pistol in your pocket. It's just you
Yeah.
really need a retention holster of some sort that can. And when I mean retention, it means that some Joe Blow can't just walk up to you and grab a hold of the handle, the
Mm-hmm.
grip, and just pull it straight out without any kind of retention or friction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
your everyday citizen is not going to need necessarily a level two or level three retention holster. Where you've got three steps that you have to take to pull the
Mm-hmm.
gun out, but
Mm-hmm.
they should have some sort of mechanism on that holster that makes it difficult for somebody just to yank it out.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's like it's part of your toolkit. It's your holster, the ammo you carry, flashlight, air spray, whatever it is, and the type of ammo you use. Going to training, we tell when I have my gun safety talks here in where I live, I encourage women shooters to join Girl in a Gun, or
Mm-hmm.
there are women shooting clubs that they can join where women teach women how to shoot. You can get
Mm-hmm.
personal trainers that can, $50 an hour, and they'll take you to the range and they'll teach you how to hold the weapon. They'll teach you how to breathe. They'll teach you how to grip the
Yeah.
weapon. All of that stuff, right? It's all about training, and
Mm-hmm.
the more training you can get, the more successful you're going to be in a self-defense incident,
Right.
right? And so when you talk about mindset, another thing that a lot of people don't think about, there's a psychological piece, right?
Right.
And I remember years and years ago when I started on this journey, I had an instructor tell me, or he told the class, he said if you are not ready, willing, and able to pull the trigger and put rounds into another human being, if you're like law says, if you're in fear of serious bodily injury and or death, that's the prerequisite in South Carolina for using deadly force. You have to be threatened with serious bodily injury and or death. And at that point, if you feel like you are, then legally you can use deadly force, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
this instructor said many years ago, he says, if you're not prepared to use deadly force, you're in the wrong class, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people go, well, I go get my CWP, I sit in the classroom for 4 hours, and we go to the range for 4 hours. I prove that I can put 50 rounds within a certain parameter on this white piece of paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to think about God help you, or God forbid you get into a self defense situation. Are you going to be able to pull that trigger? Are you going to be able to use that flashlight and deliver blows to somebody's nose, or do whatever it takes to get out of that situation so that you
Mm-hmm.
can get out of harm's way? Because
Yeah.
if you don't think you can, well, that's something you need to think out. You need to think about those scenarios before you get into them, because
Mm-hmm.
you can wind up getting hurt or killed.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we really are. Again, it goes back to society and modernity. I mean, the as we have advanced technologically, we've got locks on our doors, we've got alarm systems. We have mobile vehicles that move fast and get us where we want to go, where we can avoid certain things. A lot of that good stuff, but it has
Sure.
removed us to a certain extent from violence. I mean, we don't slaughter. I mean, in really even this, we don't slaughter our own food anymore. We outsource that, and we just go to the grocery store and look
Sure.
at this meat just magically appeared like a box of crackers just out that someone brought out there.
Right.
But no, there was a whole process to raise that and slaughter it and dress it out. And we've gotten farther as we get farther and farther removed from that, right? The more difficult it is for some people to need to make that transition in the moment of truth, so to say.
Sure.
And so there has to be some type of mental discipline or work that is done, or at least just coming to yourself and having a moment with yourself to kind of try to visualize what that would look like, what kind of emotions you might experience, and those types of things to figure out if that's something that you would be able to do.
Right.
But yeah, that's something definitely our ancestors didn't have to do because it was forced upon them just by virtue
Right.
of life. Right.
Right.
And so it's not something I think that is unnatural. I mean, I think you're hardwired for survival, but
Sure.
that instinct though has certainly been diminished. It's been deadened to a certain point. And so, I think it's incumbent upon the citizen to in a disciplined way, right? And in a smart and ethical way to revive that, like I said, under a certain sense of discipline and forethought, to reconnect to that instinct so that it is available for you if you were to need it.
Right. I know some people take different types of martial art classes like
Mm-hmm.
jujitsu and what do they call it, Krav Maga, or whatever they
Mm-hmm.
call, what's that?
Yeah.
And so I think I know several people that, like, I know several female friends of mine that are taking jujitsu, and they
Mm-hmm.
are learning how to take down holds and all kinds of different things that they're learning in the class. And so that
Mm-hmm.
I think that goes a long way in helping people to prepare mentally for
Mm-hmm.
a physical confrontation, right? And you don't have to become a black belt in karate. You don't have to be a martial artist, and you don't, or kickboxer or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Even though that is good exercise to do those things, but I think I don't know. I just wanted to talk about the psychological component to that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Sure. Yeah, I'd agree. There's all kinds of training opportunities. The more intense you can pursue, safely without injuring yourself, the better. This is a kind of an interesting tweak. I've experienced things like this, although I didn't follow this exact protocol, but I've got a buddy named Clay Martin who was a former Marine Scout sniper, and then he transitioned to the Army into Special Forces and spent I don't know how many, almost 20 years probably in Special Forces, or a good number of time, and retired. So he did a whole career, multiple combat deployments, had been in combat several times, and he's written several books. You can look him up. But he and I were talking about this one day, and then he had also put this in his book, is just putting yourself in a position where you can safely experience what total rage feels like. Not that you would want to unleash total uncontrolled rage on somebody. You don't
Sure.
want to lose control of yourself, but to experience what that feels like in your body. And one thing he said, and it might sound kind of crazy to some people, but I think I know where he's going with it. But he said, basically even just taking a stick in hand and going out and just for a couple minutes, just unleashing everything you have on this tree or this object, that you can destroy without any repercussions, right? But what that does is allows your sympathetic nervous system, right, to flood your body with all of those, adrenaline and cortisol, like all those chemicals that are
Sure.
needed, right,
Right.
and to experience what that feels like, and what that would feel like to unleash on somebody. And then it's through training you learn how to harness it and to control it, right?
Right.
It's a
Right.
controlled type of thing. But because the day and age we live in a very sanitized environment, right? It's not a bad idea. I think there's some merit in what he says.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm,
And I think a lot of the listeners to this podcast are your typical civilians that don't have any military training, don't have any
mm,
martial artist training or whatever, and so that might not even resonate with their mindset, right? They
right,
may
right.
that's not something they would. I personally would not place myself into that situation, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because physical limitations I have. I'm 63. I'm not in the
yeah,
same shape that I used to be when I was in 20 or 30.
yeah.
So, but I hear what you're saying, and I get that.
I'd also recommend that another thing that people do not think about, but I had a buddy that actually watched a guy get into a life and death encounter. And then at the end of it, as soon as it was over, he had a heart attack and died. And
Oh
so,
man.
yeah, the importance of being in shape, right? Not living a sedentary lifestyle. I mean, again, you could see very quickly, like this kind of becomes a way of life. And if you look at it, and if you're willing to pursue it as a way of life, again, not have it dictate every waking moment of your life, right? Because we still got kids, we got to
Sure.
raise, we got jobs, we
Sure.
got to work, we still want to enjoy our life. But if you can incorporate this into a way of life, then you can enjoy that training too, right? And
Sure.
it can become part of you. But the being in shape, man, that is a big deal. That is half the battle, because
Right.
again, most gunfights, if you even look at things that are caught on a security camera, they're highly dynamic. They're quite often mobile. There's at least
Sure.
some movement that's involved. If you think in terms of having to get down behind cover, I mean, if you hear shots ring out and you're not even sure what it is, I mean, one of the first things you should do is get behind cover until you can
Right.
assess what the situation is. And,
Right.
the cover doesn't always fit your body. You have to adapt to that. And if you can't get down and make yourself small behind something, and even more importantly, to get out of that position, most of us can fall into it, but
Right.
getting out and getting mobile, right?
Right.
So this is something I wrestle with people or some folks on it. They don't want to hear it, but it's just the truth, and I'm not going to lie about it. I'm not going to coddle somebody and say that it's not important or you don't have to do it. You have to have some semblance of fitness. You don't have to
Sure.
be a CrossFit athlete.
Sure.
No one's asking you to go to the Olympic trials, as an enduro racer or anything like that. But you do have to have a certain amount of flexibility, a certain amount of fitness to be able to endure those things, because they're highly
Sure.
stressful to your body, and it will help your body process the aftermath as well. And not only and just to survive it, is the main thing, but then even with the aftermath, having a fit body, I think, is integral to having a fit mind and spirit. I think they're connected, and I think
Absolutely.
the more pervasive your fitness is, I think the better off you are as a human being too.
Sure. Yeah, there's I don't think there's any argument about for being out of shape or being a sloth or
Yeah,
not being able to, it goes hand in hand with self defense.
yeah,
You need to be able to have a certain level of mobility and flexibility to
mm-hmm.
move
Yeah,
around and get away from things.
yeah,
My physical fitness is nowhere near what it used to be when I was in my
mm-hmm.
20s, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, and because of that, I recognize that, and because of that, I try not to put myself in a situation where I'm going to have to have
Right.
that kind of
Yeah,
capability, right? I'm
yeah.
I'm very careful about where I place myself, or my wife.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, that's just a natural phase of life, right? We're all going to age. We're all going to give way to entropy, some of us faster than others. But, being fit, to the best degree that you can be with,
Sure.
whatever surgeries you've had, whatever conditions you're having, there's usually something, unless you are a quadriplegic, or something, there's
Right.
usually some type of fitness program you can use. Might not be the one I'm on, might not be the one that your neighbor is on or your buddy's on, but just trying to maximize your capabilities. And I think for me, that goes back to that warrior mindset too, that's part of it, is that I want to live in such a way that I am maximizing my capabilities to the fullest. And in doing so, again, not only do I stack the deck in my favor as far as survival, but I live a more enjoyable existence. I can do things with my kids. I can do things
Sure.
that are fun and get outside with my family. So I always try to look at these things for myself from a holistic perspective. And then when we, talk about it in classes and stuff, try to approach it that way, because the last thing that I want to do is just to lay burdens on people, that aren't receptive to it, and make it, and, it's scare them away from doing something that really is really a gift. A
Sure.
fitness is a gift. Discipline is a gift because of the things that it provides you to do, right? And I know, I just came off a class in Pennsylvania, man, and there's a guy out there that's in his mid 70s, and you wouldn't tell it by looking at him. I mean, that guy was running that gun. He was running these the course of fire, movement, getting into the kneeling, getting in the prone, getting up, and because he's taking care of himself,
Right.
and he's doing the best he can at his level. He can't move like he did when he was 20, but
Sure.
he moves the best that he can in his mid 70s, and and he is enjoying his life more because of it.
Right. That's excellent stuff.
Yeah.
Mark, I appreciate you being on the podcast with me
Yeah, it
tonight
was fun. Yeah.
and talking about this stuff. This is good stuff. I really enjoy meeting people like you and talking about self-defense and the support of the Second Amendment, the U.S.
Yeah.
Constitution, and all of that, and talking about
Yeah.
guns and ammo and accessories and the warrior
Yeah.
mindset and all of that. So
Yeah, me too.
you bring a lot to the table. So thank you for being here. For listening audience, I'll say thank you for the privilege of your time. You can listen to this podcast on Captivate.fm, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and Public Radio. I upload the video version of this podcast episode to rumble.com. It's spelled just like the way it sounds, rumble.com. It's a conservative version of YouTube. Be sure to share our podcast with your Second Amendment friends, family, and coworkers. You can contact me at Liberty Gun Rights Podcast at proton.me. It's Liberty Gun Rights Podcast at proton.me. And thank you for being here, and have a wonderful day.